Hi, this is Frank Schaefer. And 40, 50 years ago, I was part of the religious right. If you have problems with the rise of the religious right, the Donald Trump presidency that depended on the votes of evangelical white Christians, then you have a problem with my past. I have a problem with my past. I fled that background, and for the last 40 years, have been doing my damnedest to undo the damage we did. The way we fought to take away choice from women, the way we made common cause often with bigots, homophobes, racists, and others on the religious right and the far right that has now become the Christian nationalist movement. But as someone who came out of that background and whose father, Francis Schaeffer, was a leader in that background, there's one thing I understand very well, and that is the opposition that Kamala Harris and the Democrats are up against. You know, there's a lot of my friends in the media, and there are a lot of my friends in the Democratic Party who do not understand the gravity of the situation we face. Kevin Roberts, for instance, who runs the Heritage Foundation, is the architect of Project 2025. How many of you know that he has very close personal ties and gets all his spiritual counseling from the secretive, far-right Roman Catholic group that has its foundation in fascist Spain called Opus Dei? How many people understand that Project 2025 and their program designed for them by the ideologues of the far-right Roman Catholic Opus Dei were instrumental in placing the Trump majority on the Supreme Court? People like Amy Coney Barrett, who belong to another secretive, weird religious group with ties to Opus Dei through some of their members. Heritage Foundation leader receives spiritual guidance from Opus Dei leaders, and Kevin Roberts of the Heritage Foundation and president of and architect of Project 2025, the conservative think tank, is now drawing up the roadmap for the second Trump presidency. The first presidency was mired in chaos, Trumpian chaos, the moronic chaos sowed by this bigot, this racist, this rapist. But the second term, if he has one, is going to be directed by people like Roberts, the Heritage Foundation, and other conservative groups that are putting together a very serious plan that Trump is now pretending he is not being directed by, because he's smart enough to understand, as he is with abortion absolutism that will be enforced in a second term, that you better not talk too openly about that. But in a speech that was delivered by the leader of the Heritage Foundation, he talked about the fact that the hardest thing of all for him to do next, for Heritage to achieve, for Opus Dei to achieve, for conservative right-wing Roman Catholics with ties back into the fascism of Francisco Franco of Spain, ally of the fascists in Europe in the 1920s and 30s, going back into the Roman Catholic Church and a papacy which in the 15th and 16th century was using galleons on which to put their slaves. That's right, slaves owned by the papacy, prisoners often who had been accused of heresy and other crimes against the church, rowing their galleons as slaves. There's a direct line from them to Franco in Spain and the other European fascists in Portugal and in Italy, Mussolini and so forth. And now we have Roberts talking about the fact that the hardest project for him, quote unquote, is going to be the battle facing conservatives in the future 50-year-old political project that they have been running, in which he urges what he calls radical incrementalism, one step at a time. Ban abortion, reverse Roe, take on women's rights, take on equality in the workplace by attacking women's rights and calling Kamala Harris a diversity and equity hire, et cetera, et cetera. But the proper way to understand this is just incrementalism stepping towards something that Kevin Roberts wants, and that's his ban of birth control in the United States of America, something that most Catholics don't even want. But then most Catholics are not part of the secretive Opus Dei organization. You know, Roberts has gained notoriety for organizing more than 100 conservative groups run by people like Gary Bauer, who I knew back in the 70s and 80s as an anti-abortion activist that worked with me, in fact, was inspired by my dad, Francis Schaeffer, and other evangelicals who have come to the fore of these groups all working together. And what so many people don't get is that people like Leonard Leo of the Federalist Society is also part of this plan and is working with the Heritage Foundation to come up with lists of the next group of people that will be appointed by a Trump presidency, even further to the Roman Catholic conservative right than Amy Coney Barrett. They already have a lock on the court. Once they have a lock on both houses of Congress and on the presidency, then Leonard Leo, conservative activist who led the Republican mission to install right-wing judges in the Supreme Court and the federal bench successfully all over the country. Like Roberts, Leo also thinks that the program he should push America toward is the one that Opus Dei has outlined, and he is also linked to Opus Dei in a 2022 speech accepting an honor from Roman Catholic organization, the John Paul II New Evangelization Award. Leo praised the center while also referring to his political opponents as, quote, vile and amoral, current-day barbarians, secularists, and bigots who are under the influence of the devil. And that's a quote. Now, that quote could have put him in the mouth of a Spanish inquisitor in the Spanish Inquisition, in the Counter-Reformation, while torturing a Jew or an evangelical Protestant Christian or anyone else they regarded as heresy. This is the language of the despotic far-right religious groups that backed Hitler during the 1930s, because he promised to restore Christian order in the same way that Vladimir Putin is promising that now too. And Heritage Foundation, Project 2025, they all draw strength and I guess encouragement from Vladimir Putin's successes in Russia in joining his government to Archbishop Kirill of Moscow, who, like Leonard Leo and these others, is a theocrat who believes that democracy must be abolished in favor of putting what they regard as real Christians, conservative Christians, Roman Catholic, Orthodox, Protestant, wouldn't matter, in charge of our government. I don't think that a lot of people understand that JD Vance, for instance, Trump's running mate, besides being a sexist who mocks a brown woman of the same ethnic derivative of his own wife. By the way, I wonder if that marriage will last, given that he's now literally running side by a rapist who mocks brown women, and he now calls Kamala Harris a DEI hire. And of course, his wife has succeeded for exactly the same reasons. She's a brilliant woman also. I wonder if she likes the fact that a woman who succeeded in similar fields to her own, the law, is called a DEI hire because her skin is brown, and that he mocks Kamala Harris's lack of having her own biological children and, quote, only having step kids. Never mind. These groups, Opus Dei and these others, are trying to enforce on the women of America an anti-birth control policy that will then be put into the law with the backing of a Supreme Court, who, by the way, has told Donald Trump that he can do anything he wants, including assassinate opponents, if it's done as an official act. I'm not making this stuff up. You can just read about it in the news. In fact, in one of the objections of a Supreme Court justice who's not part of this cabal of Opus Dei inquisitors, she actually used the example of saying, well, now he would be able to send SEAL Team 6 to assassinate a political opponent as long as it was an official act. what people don't get is that Roberts has made clear that he believes the USA is at a crossroads and, quote, in quotes, and this is a quote from him, in the process of the Second American Revolution, we will fight this revolution and it will, and I quote him, remain bloodless if the left allows it to be. In other words, we have to allow Trump to be elected because he will not accept any other election. And if he doesn't get elected, then he will call for more violence. That's what he's saying, that we have to allow the election of a president who will reject any result except the one he accepts, as he did last time. When you look at Opus Dei, it's not only controversial in the United States, but in dozens of other countries, for instance, Argentina and Paraguay, filed a complaint to the Vatican over labor and exploitation, abuse of power they say they experienced after joining the group at sites run by Opus Dei, where former students allege their education left them, quote, psychologically damaged. Well, of course, when you're in bed with fascist Spanish inquisitors who in history tortured Jews and evangelical Protestant Christians to death for being heretics, when your organization was founded by people who were working with the fascists in Spain against what they called socialist Christianity, in other words, enlightened, more open-minded Christianity, the way Roberts is, and if you are disciples of the leaders of Opus Dei who are far-right theocrats, your program that Donald Trump will adopt is going to be the most radical program of transformation the United States has ever seen. What's interesting is that during Robert's September speech in September 2023, which received little notice at the time, but is posted on the center's YouTube page, or at least was until I've mentioned it here, maybe they'll take it down now. Roberts detailed how conservative Catholics and their allies could advance US policy subtly and quietly and end access to abortion, same-sex marriage, and contraceptives. He links those things in the speech he gave. I'm not making this up. They've already done the hardest thing in getting the court, which they've loaded with right-wing, far-right ideologues, indoctrinated by Opus Dei and other right-wing groups that Amy Coney Barrett and others are part of. They have knocked down Roe, and the next thing is same-sex marriage, and the next thing is contraceptives. Now, you have to understand that if they think they can take on the women of America and achieve these things, then they will be targeting not just things to do with sexual morality, childbearing, women, contraceptives, gay rights, etc. They will challenge all our freedoms. Because in the world in which Opus Dei was comfortable, which was the version of fascism in Spain with Francisco Franco, they don't have any comfort with election results. They don't have any comfort with people who are using democracy to govern the world they live in. These are theocrats. And Robert says that even in a politically conservative setting, it can be very difficult, quote unquote, to advance the end of contraceptives, to advance the end of gay rights. He talks about radical incrementalism, as I've mentioned, and what he calls the, quote, enchilada theory of political domination. His words, enchilada theory. He says it's critical for conservatives to work first to achieve a small part, quote unquote, of a larger policy goal based on what is politically possible at the moment. Well, that's what they got Trump to do in his first term. Now they want another bite at the apple. Sometimes he said even having half an enchilada, ha, 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 that his version of far-right Roman Catholic humor, could be a victory. So you go for it incrementally. You knock down abortion, and then you go for contraceptives. You get Trump to deny that he even knows you, when in fact you've written his entire program for a second presidency and have sat with him literally in meetings doing so. And then you settle for the fact that you don't win everything in the first term. The second term you will. And if you refuse to accept the result of any election where you don't win, as for instance Franco did in Spain, who also was in Opus Dei, by the way, you just have people who disagree with you executed. You think that is far-fetched? Well, the court tells Trump that if it's an official action, he can do what he wants. Robert says no abortion is morally justified, and of course that includes rape and incest. And Roberts has advised his listeners in his speech to not accept narrative framing of the other side of the issues. He said conservatives who are anti-abortion should stop talking about it in the way the left wants them to, and instead, quote, and I quote, talk about the fact that many of them want abortion to be legal until birth. In other words, to continue the lie that what abortion is about is killing babies at term. And then never mind the fact that in vitro fertilization will be illegal, never mind the fact that most forms of birth control will be illegal that stop the implantation of a fertilized egg, blah, 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 so on and so forth. So what I would like to tell people, since I come out of this background of the far right and have been warning you for 40 years with books like my memoir, Crazy for God, which exposed what my father was saying in a Christian manifesto, which laid out the blueprint for Heritage Foundation and what they're doing now, and called for the violent overthrow of the US government unless it outlawed abortion, et cetera, et cetera. I was there when 50 years ago, people like the Federalist Society were born, with people who were following my father at the time, by the way, and the Heritage Foundation came along. And I worked with people like Gary Bauer, who are part of these organizations now, and Ralph Reed, and Franklin Graham, who I knew since I was 9 years old, who is part of all these efforts. Do you understand? I know these people personally. You have no idea how radical they are. They are very serious. Are you? My name is Frank Schaefer.